Language variation is an area that many people are not aware of, although it is spoken by us every day. We're much more aware of bilingualism, where students speak more than one language. But within every language, there is variation. So in American English, we have many variations across the country, depending on where you live. The one that people recognize the most is the one that exists in locations like Tennessee and Alabama and Georgia, and that's Southern English. So Southern English is a dialect or variation that's spoken by people who live in the South. But you also have variations like New York City, Boston, where we recognize that people park the car instead of parking the car. That's also language variation. And so students who come from regions, from backgrounds, from families where language is used a little differently come to school, and often it is difficult for them in the classroom when they start encountering reading and writing and other areas that relate directly to their oral language. So for example, I'm interested in African American children who speak African American English. African American English is a language variation that's used by African American people in their families, their homes, their communities, and is valued in the community, but you often don't hear used unless you're talking to another African American person. But when your child gets to school, when a child enters preschool, kindergarten, first grade, whatever kind of language is being used at home comes to school with them. And that's great. The language that you use at home is, as one of my friends says, the language you're loved in. And so it's the language that you value and your family values. And so when you get to school though, and kids start to learn to read, it's so much more difficult often when children are using language variation to learn to read, because they have to make connections between the language that they speak and the language that they see on paper. And the only thing that's really hard about it is you need more time. You need more exposure. You need more opportunity to figure out, I say, this a red car that I'm riding in, but the page says this is a red car that I'm writing in. And you have to learn how to use both of them. And so we know that when children come to school, often they're corrected. People treat them like errors. They're not really errors. And so what I advocate for is allowing children to come to school, use their entire linguistic repertoire to learn, to interact, to learn to read, write, problem solve in the language that they bring to school with them. And as a teacher, my job is to support children while they're doing this and figure out the junctures in their language, the places in their language where there are real differences between what they're going to encounter on a page, and help them to navigate those differences if I see them having difficulty. Otherwise, kids are really, really adept, strong language users. They understand the places where I'm not quite getting this, I'm not quite getting this right. And so as a teacher, creating the safe space where children can use their language, they can be themselves and feel supported by you as a teacher is so, so important. And so my real focus in my whole career has been on supporting children, all children, but specifically I'm focused on African American children who are struggling to learn to read for many, many reasons, and trying to identify the strengths that they bring to the learning process. And one of the strengths is language. Often when you use a variety of language, people think you're less able, but the reality is that so many African American children have strong language skills. They can argue, they're creative with language, they can play with language, and we need to figure out how to take advantage of that and utilize it in classrooms to help support them as they're learning to read and write. So the goal for children in the classroom is to feel supported, is to feel like their language use is valuable, to feel that it's valued by all of us. And when we don't do that, we pay for it in the long run. And Our goal is not to harm children, it's to help them. And especially when it comes to learning academic skills, language is critical to almost everything in a classroom. And language is everything. Reading, writing, spelling are language on paper. And so if we can support children who use language varieties like African American English or Southern English or Appalachian English to take what they know and to make the connections to text that are necessary to be good readers, writers, and spellers, that's what we should do. And the way to do that is to support, to extend, and to have high expectations for every child who walks into the classroom.